Welcome to the TeenTix Arts Podcast, also known as TAP, a Seattle-based youth podcast that focuses on empowering youth voices through the exploration of art. Here on this podcast, we share our favorite artistic topics by exploring their histories and cultural impacts. But not only by offering our perspective as teens, we interview artists, from emerging teen artists to ones well-established in their careers. I'm Tegan.
I'm Blue, and this episode we're talking about the history and importance of practical effects in film. So for a little bit of background into this topic, special effects are defined by Studio Binder as techniques and technologies that create illusions or enhance visual elements in a movie. So special effects is kind of the broader term, and special effects can be done practically or digitally, but we're specifically talking about practical effects, so these are things that are done using physical techniques like things that actually exist in the real world to create these special effects. These are things that are captured on camera, like when you're actually shooting the movie, not things that happen in post and editing things. So for some examples, this can be makeup that alters someone's appearance. It can make them look older. There's prosthetics that make them look like a random creature or something, or make them look like they have an injury. Lots of things like that. Makeup is a big part of it. There's things like animatronics, miniatures, puppets, and there's pyrotechnics and weather effects. I feel like a lot of times people think about practical effects or special effects as big things, but if a scene is in the rain and it's not raining and they create rain, that's a special effect. And there's also mechanical effects that can be done to the camera or the set that cause things to happen in a certain way for the camera. And there's lots of other examples of this too, but those are just some of the main ones that you probably know about. And then to talk about our connections to this topic and why we wanted to talk about it for this episode. For me personally, I love horror movies. It's my favorite genre. I love specifically 80s horror because of the practical effects. That's my favorite part about the horror genre, or one of my favorite parts about it. And I think practical effects are part of what makes the horror genre so special. A lot of the heart of it is through the physical aspects of it and through finding ways to physically make things possible. And personally, I think that a lot of modern horror movies that use CGI, I'm oh, this isn't good. I was this is so the heart of it is just gone from it, and that's why I love practical effects so much. I'm also a filmmaker, and I also really appreciate the DIY aspect of things because I just think it's cool how accessible they are, and you don't have to have $1 million bajillion to create a crazy cool effect in a movie. And a lot of things in film are not accessible, so I think it's really beautiful how practical effects are so accessible.
Yeah, I also love horror movies. I love movies that make you feel like you're in the movie, and I think horror movies do the best at that for me, especially with practical effects. I think the first horror movie I watched was Insidious, and I was immediately in love with horror movies, and the adrenaline rush during and after of the after debrief of horror movies is so fun. But there's also so many films that I love that wouldn't be the same if there wasn't practical effects, also with that immersive feeling.
So just a quick spoiler warning, I'm going to give a blanket one for all of the movies we're talking about instead of doing individual ones. But we're talking about the movie Metropolis, A Trip to the Moon, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Thing, the 1980s version, An American Werewolf in London, The Substance, and Hereditary.
I also wanted to add a little bit of a gore warning. We are talking about some movies with some scenes that we're going to be mentioning in detail, so if you get uneasy by those things, just a little bit of a warning.
Yeah. Okay, so to get into it, just to talk about, we're going to go through the history of film and practical effects. So we're starting with the early film. Film as a medium began in the late 1800s, and special effects were actually not that far behind it. They happened super quickly after the medium of film became a thing, just because you kind of need them kind of need them to make things cool. What is considered the first special effect was done by Alfred Clark in 1895 with something called the stop technique, which was used to capture a reenactment of the beheading of Mary, Queen of Scots, which is just stopping the camera when the blade was like reached the actor's neck, and then they replaced it with a dummy, and then they continued to film so that the head could like be not actual someone getting beheaded. And this is like what became the stop motion technique that we see, and like just like a very early version of that. Also, an early pioneer film, George Méliès, used stop motion animation and miniatures in many of his films. He was like a super prominent director in the like early 1900s, and he was like really masterful at stop motion and like miniatures and stuff like that. A common technique during this time was something called a matte, where certain parts of the film are masked to control which parts are exposed. So, like, you can mask a certain part, expose it, and then mask the other part and expose it again, and, like, you can get multiple images in the same frame. A common thing was, like, they changed the background or stuff like that, but you can do a lot of things with that. If you, like, use Photoshop or, like, any Adobe things, like this is a thing you can do now, like on a computer, but they had to like physically black out the film to do that during this time. But yeah, so for an example of a film during this time period, I'm going to talk about Metropolis, which came out in 1927, and it's a German silent film that is set in a dystopian urban future, and it explores the characters' attempts to bridge the class divide in the city. And in the movie, there was a lot of pioneering special effects. There were miniatures, like I talked about earlier, and also there was a camera on a swing, which they used to like create like interesting shots, not just like a static thing, but it was like still smooth because it was like on a swing and it wasn't someone holding the camera. The special effects expert on this movie, Eugen Schuftan, he created something called the Schuftan process, which is like a thing that like people like used like in the future. It was like a really prominent thing. Alfred Hitchcock used it a lot. But in this movie, it was a technique that there was a mirror in front of the camera positioned at like a 45-degree angle, and it was between the camera and the miniatures that they were using, and it like kind of outlined where the actors would go, and then it like transferred it to a mirror. It's so hard to describe. I would like look it up and like see, because it's like a crazy thing. I don't even really fully understand it. But it's similar to a technique that was used in theater a lot to like make things look like they're there and they're not there, you know? And it's similar to a matte shot like I described earlier. Also, there's a character in this movie called the Maschinenmensch, and it's a robot that's portrayed by a human actor. And there was a full-body suit that was made for the actor. It was from a base of, like, I think they did, like, a latex, like, full-body cast on this actress, and then they built the suit, like, from it, with the material that's called plastic wood, which is not real plastic or real wood, I think. It's very confusing. But it made the suit look like metal, but it would still allow the actor to move. And a lot of, like, full-body suits became, like, a prominent thing in sci-fi and horror in the future for, like, creating monsters and stuff like that.
Yeah, another example, you mentioned the director earlier, but it's A Trip to the Moon, which was made in 1902. And it's also a silent film, and it's by George Méliès. And it's often considered the first science fiction movie. It follows a group of astronomers who build a rocket and launch it to the moon. It is a silent film, so it's up for interpretation. But A Trip to the Moon stands as like a landmark in early cinema, and it's notable for its innovative practical effects and narrative. It's only 14 minutes, but at the time it was one of the most extensive and technically complex films of its era. An iconic image that many of you have seen is when the space capsule launches into the moon's face. It has become like a statement picture of early cinema. It's so amazing. But he actually created 6 variations of the film, including different versions with different colors and alternative endings, demonstrating his commitment to the experimentation of film.
I think I like read that he when he did the different colors, he was literally like coloring on the film with like colored pencils, which I think is so cool. But yeah, that was one of the first like movies I remember my dad making me watch. Was A Trip to the Moon. It's
Everyone
really
should watch it. It's so good.
Yeah, it's really, really good. So moving forward in time, towards the end of, like, a lot forward in time, towards the end of World War II, we saw, like, a huge boom in science fiction films. With the development of the atomic bomb, beginning of the Cold War, a lot of more people were interested in science. So there was just a lot more, like, science fiction in film and in, like, literature and stuff like that. And also in Japan, a genre called tokusatsu became prominent. Tokusatsu means special effect in Japan. So the genre is just like a heavy use of special effects in these films. A lot of times these were giant monsters that were created by an actor on a suit in a set comprised of miniatures to make the actor look larger than life. Eiji Tsuburaya was the special effects director on the pioneering film Godzilla, which is probably the most prominent example of the tokusatsu genre. And he created a lot of the effects on this film that would be staples of the science fiction genre and or the tokusatsu genre and of all science fiction films in general. And this time period, like during the 50s and 60s, was when we saw the rise of a lot of classic monster movies with like actors in full body suits and prosthetics. And later on in this era, we saw the release of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was a super pioneering film for special effects and just for all of film in general. It's just like a really, really important film. So for my example, I'm going to talk about a very classic monster movie, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, from 1954. And it's about a group of scientists in the Amazon who encounter an amphibious humanoid creature who lives in the waters of the lagoon. I think it's like one of the most iconic movies, the classic monster movie is just like a really iconic thing, and this specific movie influenced horror and sci-fi tons. So the Gill Man in The Creature from the Black Lagoon was created by making a full body suit, like I talked about earlier. That there were two different actors, one for on land and one for in the water. There was two different versions for each of them, and they were designed by Millicent Patrick. But in the original ideas for the character, the producer, William Allen, intended for the Gill Man to be much more humanoid than he ended up being. If you haven't seen like what he looks like, it's basically like a guy, but he's like really scaly and he's got like gills on his face. But in the original concept, it was just like kind of just like a guy. I saw photos. It was just like a guy in a suit that didn't have any scales on it, and it was just like a fish face. It was like a fish mouth.
I love seeing behind the scenes of like practical effects. It's so cool.
Yeah, there's a great photo of Millicent Patrick touching up the Gill Man suit on the set, which I think is you should look it up. It's a really cool photo. But there's a quote from William Allen talking about the original concept, and he said that it would still frighten you, but it would frighten you because of how human it was, not the other way around. And I think it's really interesting when we're talking about practical effects because practical effects are so human, and it's like they're so I think refreshing in a time period where we see so many computer effects all the time. It's so great to see something more human. But in terms of making the actual suit, similar to the Maschinenmensch like I talked about earlier, it was created by attaching foam rubber pieces onto a latex bodysuit. But also in the movie, there's scenes where the gills like kind of move up and down. So yeah, when the gills like moved up and down, they like pushed compressed air behind them, and it like they kind of moved, and it like simulated the breathing of the creature.
My example is 2001: A Space Odyssey. And this movie follows a space mission to Jupiter guided by the AI HAL 9000, which takes a turn. The film is known for its philosophical themes, groundbreaking visuals, and realistic depiction of space travel. Although many sci-fi films before relied on its traditional special effects, 2001 revolutionized the genre with its use of practical effects, creating an unmatched sense of realism. So the director, Stanley Kubrick, and his team avoided conventional techniques like blue screens and instead used like new methods like to simulate zero gravity and space flight. The team used multiple innovative techniques like rotating sets for artificial gravity, wire and glass tricks to create floating objects like the famous pen scene, miniature models filmed with slow-moving cameras to simulate massive spaceships, and front projection instead of matte paintings for realistic alien landscapes. The film's meticulous practical effects set a new standard for sci-fi realism, influencing generations of filmmakers, and it actually won an Oscar for Best Visual Effects in 1969.
I feel like 2001 is one of those movies where it's like everything after it was so influenced by it that like now it like doesn't look as cool because like everything like just copied it. But like when you think about like for the time, it is like insanely good for how like the effects and like just the movie is just so good.
Yeah, with a lot of these movies, like watching it, it looks so simple, but it's crazy to think like this was so groundbreaking for them. Like even with the silent films, like this was unheard of.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I also, this is kind of a tangent, but I was thinking about like Frankenstein and like people were terrified by Frankenstein, even though watching it now, it's not as scary to us because we've seen so much innovation. But,
yeah. I just read Frankenstein for my English class, and we watched the original 1930s movie in class, and yeah, it was really, really good. I actually really like that movie.
Yeah,
I feel like a lot of those movies, it's like old, so it's like boring.
Yeah,
but like I wasn't bored. I was like really interested. It's really good.
Yeah.
So for the next like time frame, we're gonna talk about my personal favorite. So CGI, it began in the late 1950s, but it started to kind of become what we know it as today, like in its like modern form in the 1980s. Filmmakers, they started using computer-generated images instead of scale models or miniatures on set. And the invention of CGI, which stands for computer-generated imagery, is like it changed everything about film special effects. And like what we know it as today is just like would not be anything without CGI. But in the 80s, a lot like most films still use practical effects to some extent. And also in the 80s, like slasher movies, gory body horror movies were super prominent. And they all used practical effects to create the things that were happening on screen. Directors like David Cronenberg, Sam Raimi, Clive Barker, and John Carpenter, they created horror films that were masterpieces of the genre, but they also had incredible practical effects that made the 80s horror landscape what it was. So for my example, I'm going to talk about one of my absolute favorite movies ever. I love this movie so much. The Thing from 1982. It was so hard to pick just one movie. Literally, like, there's so many good ones, like Hellraiser, The Fly, the Alien series, Evil Dead. But I feel like The Thing is, like, the definitive example to show what's so great about practical effects. Like, when I talk about practical effects, this is always the first movie I bring up because it's just so, so good. So The Thing is actually a remake of a movie from the 50s, which is called The Thing from Another World. But it's about a group of American researchers stationed in Antarctica. That's how you say it. Who, after witnessing mysterious and gruesome deaths of their dogs and fellow humans, discover a creature that can assume the shape of its victims. The surviving members are forced to find and kill the creature before it kills all of them first. What's interesting about this movie to me is that we never actually see the Thing because it replicates the other people. It's only shown to the audience and the characters that they are taken over by the Thing when they turn into, like, various weird things. Like, there's a head with spider legs, a dog that has tentacles, and a lot of other things like that. John Carpenter, who directed this movie, specifically didn't want the monster in the movie to be what he called a guy in a suit, which is like what I was talking about earlier. A lot of classic sci-fi movies did that. So I think it's a really interesting take on that because it's like it could not be like farther from that. And it's crazy like how quickly that happened over the course of just a few decades. But yeah, so Rob Bottin, who was the SFX artist on The Thing, he made the creature effects with food, latex, wax, chemicals, and puppets. So it's like a true example of practical effects. I think a lot of it was like creamed corn and bubble gum, which I think is amazing.
That's how you know, like, they are so dedicated to their work. Like,
Yes.
they see something and they need it.
Yeah, I was reading that he lived on the studio for weeks. Like, he worked like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on this movie for the entire time it was being, created. And like I'm not like exaggerating. He literally slept on like the floor at the Universal Pictures
That's
studio.
like method acting for crew.
Yeah,
Like,
for sure. One of the most iconic scene of this movie, I'm gonna kind of describe it in detail, so this is the gore we were talking about earlier. One of the characters has to use a defibrillator on another character, and then when that happens, his chest like opens up, and then it rips off the guy's arms, and then the chest explodes, and then the character's head, it grows up, and then it breaks off, and it forms the spider head that I talked about earlier. It's insane. But to create this, a mold of the actor's chest was created that had hydraulic jaws to rip off the prosthetic arms. So they got a double amputee who was wearing a realistic mask of the actor that was supposed to get their arms ripped off, and had him wear prosthetic arms, and then they got ripped off for the scene. I know, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, and that shot, like, the shot of, like, the chest explosion after that happened, it literally took 10 hours to set up the shot.
Oh my God.
They had to do it twice, but it took 10 hours to set up, and they used bubble gum and, like, chemicals to create the alien guts. And then for, like, the spider head thing, the head was, like, on animatronic legs that, like, scurried away, and it made it look like it was moving. Literally, like, look up this scene on YouTube if you haven't seen it. It's insane. But because these effects were so good, the camera crew was able to be less constricted with the angles and the shots that they could get, which I think is, like, a really, like, unspoken, like, job of people, like, people making special effects, like, they're, like, helping everyone out, because, like, without that, like, it would just be, like, so hard, because, like, they weren't expecting them to be so good, so they were like, oh, we can, like, do all these cool things with the camera, because we don't have to worry about, like, oh, this angle you can see, this mechanism, or whatever.
I also feel like that would help actors. I'm not an actor, so I don't know, but I feel like, just, like, I bet in real life that was so, like, realistic, and even I feel like I would be scared. But I feel like that would just help the, like, realism of the movie.
Yeah, no, I feel like definitely you're more in it, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm going to talk about An American Werewolf in London, and it follows David, a backpacker who survives a werewolf attack, but later experiences horrifying transformation while being haunted by his friend's ghost. The film is known for its dark humor and groundbreaking practical effects. Although it has, like, a pretty basic werewolf plot, it's a pretty classic plot, but it actually changed a lot about horror movies when it came out. This movie was one of the most successful werewolf movies made in its years. And before this, most werewolf, like, transformation scenes were made with single pictures transitioning with, like, the blending effect or the fading effect. But the director, John Landis, and practical effects artist Rick Baker wanted to make it a real-time transformation. And so Rick Baker and his team used a combination of techniques to achieve the transition scene. They used, like, prosthetics and makeup for close-up shots, animatronics, camera tricks, and clever editing. I totally recommend watching this because, like, it is so cool, like, especially the hand scene, so cool. But it also won an Oscar for Best Makeup at the 54th Annual Academy Awards in 1981.
Nice. Yeah, it's been, like, so long since I've watched that movie, but I need to rewatch it.
It's so good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so for our last little like time period we're going to talk about, we're getting into modern special effects. So in the modern filmmaking world, CGI is the default when creating special effects for movies, but practical effects are still used very often, especially in lower budget movies, because CGI is a lot of money. You need to hire like 1 million people, and like so much goes into creating good CGI. That's why you see a lot of bad CGI as well, because it's really expensive to make it look realistic. But a lot of directors, like even bigger budget directors, still use practical effects, like Christopher Nolan and Wes Anderson. They both are like champions of practical effects and stuff like that. And also the film studio Mykah makes huge scale stop motion animated films using miniatures. They did Coraline, Kubo and the Two Strings, 1 million movies. They're or not 1 million. There's like 6, but they're really good.
So good.
They're all really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So practical effects are still very much a thing, even though CGI is like a lot of what we see. Yeah. So for my example, I'm going to talk about The Substance, which just came out last year in 2024. And The Substance follows an aging actress who is losing her relevance and beauty in the eyes of the public and of major studios. After she is fired from her long-running show, she decides to inject herself with The Substance, a serum that promises a younger, better version of yourself. But this begins to go horribly wrong. A quick little side note, it was really awesome to see a horror movie getting recognized by major award shows. The Substance was nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards, and Demi Moore won a Golden Globe for her performance in this movie, which is so awesome. I still think she should have won the Oscar, but it's fine.
No, I'm so glad that like they took this movie with like as something that could be nominated, because I think a lot of times horror movies like make people feel uncomfortable, so they don't like think it's like a thing that should be recognized, but it was so good.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I think horror movies are like very often not recognized at all by the Academy, but I think it's great that this one was. There's tons of prosthetics in this movie. There's like kind of a slow transformation with the main characters where there's more and more prosthetics being used. And I think the prosthetics and practical effects in this movie really made the film. Like, it really brought a sense of realness. And I think also, like, with the subject matter, like, talking about, like, critiquing society's perception of women, I think that doing practical effects is, like, really the only way to do it. Because I think, like, with CGI, you lose some of that.
Yeah. And I feel like it showed, like, how, like, gross it could be. Like, I think, like, with CGI, it just wouldn't have shown, like, how real, and I think it added to the, like, overall message of the movie.
Yeah. The final monster in this movie is a great example of practical effects over CGI. If you haven't seen it, it's really insane. But it's really awesome as well. I read an interview with one of the people on the SFX makeup team, Pierre-Olivier Persine, who said, quote, "We had a stunt double for the wide shots. At first, Coralie, who's the director, was like, I want to put Margaret inside the suit, Margaret Qualley, who played one of the characters. And I was like, but it's only going to be one eye. She's going to be completely twisted. Coralie insisted that she wanted to have Margaret for the close-ups. I have to say, watching the movie, she was right, because that's really a performance, and you can see that's her." End quote. And I think that is, like, so important. Like, I think that's so true. Like, you, like, don't get that human thing with that character at the end of the movie without, like, the practical effects and stuff like that. Also, another nod from this movie, the movie Reanimator also uses, like, the bright green liquid, and I was like, I saw it, and I was like, oh my god, yay!
Very cool.
Yeah.
My example is Hereditary. And Hereditary is a psychological horror film directed by Ari Aster. And the film follows a grieving family tormented by sinister occurrences after the death of their secretive grandmother. Like the name Hereditary, it's super layered with family history and trauma and highlights each family member's different traits. this movie, I literally could talk about for hours. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Genuinely so amazing. Also, I think that like the acting is so amazing. But one of the scenes like relating to practical effects, this is a little bit of a gory section, so just warning again, but was the possession / broken nose scene with the teenage son, Peter, played by Alex Wolff, who's also one of my favorite actors. The scene shows him smashing his face into a desk against his own will. And every time he makes an impact with the desk, his nose gets more injured. And I feel like that's what, like, that practical effects really stood out to me because you can see the progression of the injury. I also think another scene that the film is known for is the decapitation scene with the youngest daughter. I honestly still think about this scene every single day.
Same.
Like, genuinely. But to create the, like, collapsible inner skull, they used super cool, like, different, like, things behind the scenes. Like, the collapsible inner skull was built, and it was meant to mirror the damage created on another version of the head that was built to represent the aftermath of the accident. Tests were carried out in the makeup shop using a baseball bat to simulate the telephone pole's impact. And a quote from Steve Newburn, a makeup and prosthetic designer that worked on the film, he said in an interview that they only used a few frames of it. It was a little too disturbing, which I think is so amazing that the people making the film thought it was too disturbing to show, and watching the movie, I can attest to that.
Yeah, I feel like I rarely, this is not like a flex or anything, I rarely like get super scared in horror movies. I was so
Terrified.
freaked out in Hereditary. I was so freaked out, especially because I have a nut allergy.
Oh.
So that scene was so stressful. I was like, this is like my worst nightmare.
It is actually the most stressful thing. Like, me and my sister were watching this movie in like a dark room, and we were like hugging each other the whole time. But
Yeah.
it was so good.
Yeah, for sure. So I think in like a modern world where CGI is so prominent in film, and it's like what you think of the most when you think of special effects right now in 2025, I think it's a really interesting conversation to have about why practical effects still matter and are still a very important part of the film world. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it because I have a lot of them.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't realize that practical effects are used so much. That's why I feel like The Substance was super important, because I feel like it kind of brought back acknowledging practical effects. And like, personally, I really love a balance, because I think CGI, like, it is a great tool, and like some things you can't do with practical effects, and I think it's added to so many movies. But also, I think right now we're kind of going in a trend towards like all CGI, all technical, which I think we're kind of losing the art of practical effects, which I think is still so important. But I feel like for me, I think the balance is just so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I think, yeah, CGI is definitely, like, obviously a very important tool. Like, I'm not, like, trying to say that CGI sucks. But I think also, like, what I was talking about earlier about, like, CGI not being accessible, I think in, like, we talk about, like, Hollywood as, like, the place where all movies happen, and that is like not accessible at all for like the average person. So I think that it's great to have like more accessible things, and I think it's great that like we can film stuff with our phones, and like most people have phones and can film things and can do practical effects on their own, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And also, like, when you watch a movie, like, you can tell when it's practical effects versus CGI. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just, like, there's a lot, like, more spirit with practical effects, like having to use what's at your disposal, and figuring out how to make things happen, being DIY about it. And yeah, I think it's when you see like bad CGI, it's like, that's bad CGI, and like your computers are supposed to be good at that, and it's like, why does it look like that? But when you see like a bad practical effect, it's like, oh, that's cute. Yeah. It's like still has like a human spirit about it, so you can still appreciate it even if it's like bad. You know.
I also feel like there's a difference between like CGI like to cut corners and as an art, because I feel like CGI can also be used like in big productions as a way to save money and save time for actors, but I think like using it as a tool is so cool. And I think it's also obviously with the balance of practical effects, but I do think like when CGI is not done great, it definitely takes away from the authenticity of the movie, but obviously there's pros and cons of both.
Yeah. I feel like I can definitely be a hater of CGI. Yeah. Just because, like I was talking about earlier, like with modern horror, when you see a movie made with CGI, it's just like,
yeah.
And it's just like, oh, I thought this, you know. Yeah. But I think that CGI, like, definitely is, like, important. And it's, like, really cool that, like, we have the technology to be able to do these things. But I think it's important that we don't, like, forget that, like, this is still possible. And it, like, people, like, for decades have been figuring out how to do these effects without using a computer to do them, you know?
Yeah.
So for our interview this episode, we're talking to Naomi Mechem-Miller, who is a non-binary makeup artist from Seattle, Washington. They love all things horror, fantasy, and science fiction, with their favorite genre being horror comedy. Naomi attended the Art of Makeup School in Portland, Oregon, and completed 2 years education at Sarah Lawrence College in New York. They are currently living in Bothell, Washington, and are a member and co-owner of Real Fiction Studios, a special effects studio located in Bothell. Real Fiction Studios specializes in practical effects, blood squibs, props, costumes, prosthetics, and other fun things that will increase your production value. So, for my first question, can you just, like, introduce yourself, tell us a little about yourself, how did you get started in the world of SFX makeup?
Yeah, I am Naomi Mechem-Miller. I'm 25 years old, non-binary makeup artist from Seattle, Washington. I've been doing makeup since I was in like middle school, starting to, experiment on my own face. What really led me into thinking of it as more of a career than just a hobby. When I was 16, I had a friend take me behind the scenes to a Nordstrom photo shoot. I got to meet their makeup artist, talk to them about it. And that was when I first started being kind of serious about it. I went to makeup school in Portland, Oregon when I was 19. And that really kind of kickstarted everything.
Cool. That's cool. Yeah. Did you start doing like, I guess normal makeup? I don't know the right word. Like classic makeup, and then like getting more into like SFX. Like, how did that start?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely started doing more kind of classic beauty looks. I had the, raccoon eyeliner in middle school and that look. But I kind of started experimenting with different fun beauty type looks, and kind of changing that up a little bit. And that just naturally led down a road into effects and seeing what else I could do, and, bringing makeup out of the box more than just looking pretty for being outside.
yeah, totally, for sure. Yeah. So kind of like on those lines, like what is your favorite part of the work that you do? Like what's your favorite part of the process? Or yeah.
I mean, I really love all aspects of filmmaking, not just makeup and effects. So I love being able to, meet other creative people on set, collaborate in that process and kind of create a world together, tell a story. And that's one of my favorite parts of the makeup and effects world too, is building characters and designing, whether it's creatures or a wound or, a character's look. It's a lot of fun to kind of delve into the reasons for things being there. And, I'm going to make this cut look like this because it was made in this particular way, slashing this direction, that type of stuff is all very fun.
Yeah, totally. That's cool. I feel like that's like not a lot of like what people think about when they like see that. Like that's cool to like, get more into the nitty-gritty, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have any like favorite projects you did?
Yeah, so my favorite one is the most recent one. Very excited about it. I co-wrote it with my partner, Jason Brooks, who we started Real Fiction Studios together. He directed it. It is coming out in select theaters, April 18th.
Nice.
With hopefully a wider and wider release. It is called The Death of Snow White. It's a horror take on the original Snow White by the Grimm brothers, not the Disney version.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun. It has comedy, it has romance, it has passion and heart, but it also has a lot of scary moments, a lot of blood and gore, a lot of, scenes that'll make you go, ooh.
Love that. Yeah, awesome. Okay. So what inspires you when you work on a project?
Like I said, a lot of it is collaboration. I really love talking to other creative people and working together to build something. I look to nature a lot, especially when I'm designing like a creature. I really love doing research on different animals and things. And okay, if this is going to be an aquatic creature, would it have gills? Would it breathe through its skin? Based on the environment. Yeah, that's my favorite part of it. I know I already said that, but
yeah, no, I love it. I love it. Do you have any like favorite like movies, like their specific practical effects? Like do you have any like specific like films or shows or anything that inspires you in that realm of things?
That is a great question. The first one that comes to mind is The Thing. I feel like that's kind of the classic answer just because it's so fantastic. I don't know. I feel like I want to answer that by saying what I grew up watching. So I wasn't really into horror per se. I was more into the kind of like supernatural Doctor Who type of deal.
Love.
So I think that's part of why I love kind of creatures and aliens and fantasy sci-fi.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I love all those. And then last question. It's kind of like, because we're talking about like broadly like practical effects and like why they're still so valuable when like CGI is a thing. So I would love to get like your take on like how you feel practical effects like still have value, still are important.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big part of The Death of Snow White. Actually, the movie is about 95% practical. The only digital effects are in there as like magic and things that you physically cannot do in the real world.
Yeah.
So it's been on my mind a lot, especially with AI, being such a big topic. I really think that practical effects are so valuable for every aspect of filmmaking. When it comes to actors, you'll get a better performance. They'll feel better about their performance if they can interact with something that's real and right in front of them, versus being on a green screen or a little tennis ball on a stick or something. It's harder to get those genuine reactions when on Jurassic Park. A lot of that stuff is they're looking up at a 20-foot T-Rex towering ahead of them. That's a real fear. But I think it's also just such a beautiful art form, and it would be so sad to lose that because there's so many different ways that you can do things. There's so many different things you can do. People are still, coming up with new techniques, new materials to this day, and it's so rich with everything about the makeup and effects industry that it would be so sad to lose that. And I know that moviegoers love seeing real stuff too. I always love seeing real stuff in a movie.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think like it kind of like like non-practical effects kind of take away like the human aspect of things, and I think that is so important, especially like with AI being like such a big thing now. Like I feel like we need that like human creation. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And there is something to say about the imperfectness of practical stuff. I think that kind of adds to that humanity of this, it's not perfectly symmetrical, so therefore it could exist in our real world.
Yeah, for sure. I think I love a lot of like really badly made like 80s horror that has like horrible effects, and it's like it's because like someone made this and they tried and it was bad, but it's amazing, you know? Like
Exactly.
it's not the same when you see like bad CGI. It's like, "Oh, isn't that your job to make it look good?"
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
This was the TeenTix Arts Podcast. Thank you for listening. Hopefully this episode convinced you to check out some of the films we talked about and encouraged you to appreciate the special effects in the next movie you watch. Join us next month when we talk about another artistic inspiration of one of the TAP hosts.